respiratory system is the system that supplies oxygen to the body, to all the cells, and it removes carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, you can write it as CO2 also, and oxygen O2. And the respiratory system is formed by the nasal cavity and the sinuses, the pharynx, that's the back of the throat, the larynx as you go down towards the trachea, and then you have the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, and then the alveoli, the very ends of the bronchioles in the lungs, and I'll show you in a moment. So this is one of the functions, the respiratory system in the body, that is voluntary and involuntary. So if we don't control the breath is there. We are being breathed basically throughout the day. But then we can also control it, and then it becomes voluntary, because then we can actually do pranayama, for example. We can take longer inhales and exhales. We can hold the breath, and that's what we mean with that it's voluntary. So we control it. You have this picture also in your book, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. And this is showing you, and I will show you with the indicator of my of my computer. Maybe then you can see that. You have of course, the nostrils, the passage where we have all these hairs that, remember, I told you last time, it sort of helps to clean out, or how do you say, like that there's no foreign objects coming into the lungs, so it clears the air before it comes into the lungs. Then we have the nasal cavity and the sinuses. And here also, it's a little bit moist, so the air gets moistened and also warmed up. And then as you go down the back of the throat, that's called the pharynx. And then as you go more down, you have the epiglottis, and that's the little sort of doorway that makes sure that when we eat that it closes, so that of course no food comes in to the trachea, because otherwise we start to cough. And everybody has had it at some point in their lives where they're either drinking something and it comes into the windpipe, or eating something. You have your larynx then just below the epiglottis. And then coming into the windpipe, the trachea, and that then starts to branch off. You come into, it's like almost like a tree. We branch off into the bronchi, and then smaller into the bronchioles. And then right at the end of the bronchioles, there are these little balloons, and they are called the alveoli. And in the alveoli, around the alveoli, you have all these capillaries. They're lying around it, and that's where actually the O2 and the CO2 molecules diffuse through the pores in the walls, and the O2 comes, so the oxygen comes into the bloodstream, and the CO2 is moving back into the lungs, and then of course exhaled. And then we have the vocal cords. The vocal cords are around here, and that is like a muscle that we use to speak. And there's a little bit about that also. If you're interested in how does speaking work, you will see that in your manual on page 39. You can see it. So how does breathing work? So through the nasal cavities and the sinuses, they filter the air that comes in. So the air gets sucked into the nose, and then it passes down the back of the throat, and then through pharynx, larynx, and trachea, it comes into the bronchi, and then of course passes through to the bronchioles. The sort of the more branched off parts of the bronchi, and then all the way coming down or coming towards all the alveoli and those little balloons. And as I mentioned before, we have those capillaries around the alveoli, and there the exchange takes place of the O2 and the CO2. And then what we exhale, it's the same way. It goes out through the trachea, larynx, pharynx, through the nasal cavities, through the nostrils. We breathe out, and it's the CO2, of course, that we breathe out. Now I have a little video for you, but so we have 3 ventral, meaning on the side of the belly, cavities. We have the thoracic cavity at the upper chest, it's inside the rib cage, the lungs and the heart are in there. Then we have the abdominal cavity, and we have the pelvic cavity. And I'll just show you the picture here for a moment. So if you look at my indicator, you see here the thoracic cavity. So this is where the heart and the lungs are in. You have the diaphragm that separates the thoracic and the abdominal cavity. This is the abdominal cavity where our digestive system is in, or most of the digestive system. Our organs, digestive organs are in there. And then we have the pelvic cavity that contains the bladder, the reproductive organs, the rectum. There's a line of fascia, a sheet of fascia in between, linea terminalis it's called. And then you also have the dorsal cavities, which are the cavities that lie on the backside. And that would be for the spinal cord, and we have the cranial cavity, which is for the brain. So all 3 cavities are open to the external environment of those ventral cavities. And the upper 2 are divided by the diaphragm. So the diaphragm basically moves up and down as we breathe. So it will change the shape of those cavities. As you're breathing in, the diaphragm contracts, lowers down. So the chest cavity, the thoracic cavity, becomes bigger. Air gets sucked in. But as that diaphragm presses down, you can imagine that it's going to squeeze the organs. And I'll just stand up another time, and you'll see if the diaphragm first is here and my organs get the space to also be more up here. The moment that I breathe in and the diaphragm comes down as it contracts, it's pressing the organs down, and meaning that then where can it go? Well, not towards the back really. It comes out, because this is then a little bit more the softer part, and the belly comes forward as we breathe in. And as we exhale, it comes back in, because then the diaphragm goes up again and the organs can go back up. So it's important that you realize that the belly doesn't come forward because of air that actually comes in to the abdominal cavity, because that never happens. So when we breathe, it's only the air that goes into the thoracic cavity, into the lungs. It's all sealed off, so the air doesn't go into your belly or into the abdominal cavity. So you can say both cavities, they change their shape, but they don't change their volume both. As you inhale and the air gets into the lungs, then yes, the thoracic cavity changes shape and also changes volume, because air gets into the lungs. But the abdominal cavity only changes shape. It gets sort of squished down and then the belly comes forward. So it's a change of shape, but not a change of volume. And the only time that the volume changes inside the abdominal cavity is when we eat or drink. And then we have food inside the digestive system. This picture is also in your manual. I'm just going to continue a little bit with the muscles that help with breathing, but let me just check quickly for a moment. Is everybody still okay, or are there questions? Everybody's okay and understanding it also about that we don't breathe into our bellies. I mean, we say we breathe into our bellies, and of course we send the energy of the breath there, but there's never really air inside the belly. So key muscles of breathing. Yeah, we, of course, have the diaphragm that I already mentioned a few times. And that is really our, the agonist, the main muscle that really does the most of the work as we breathe. But then we have lots of other muscles that also help with our inhales and with our exhales. And with the inhale, you can just imagine any muscle that helps to expand the rib cage, that helps to broaden, to widen the rib cage, to make it bigger. Any muscle that does that helps with inhalation, right? Because that's what we need when we breathe in. We need to create a bigger space so that the air basically gets sucked in automatically. It's working like a sort of a vacuum pump. And then as we exhale, any muscle that would contract the ribs, again, making the rib cage smaller or compressing around the belly, that will help with the exhale. And I'll just show you the pictures as we go through these muscles. So this is that dome-shaped diaphragm. And if you, again, follow my indicator, you'll see this big sheet of fascia here. This is the tendon of the diaphragm. Then, of course, it's also connected here to the vertebrae, and it's connected to the rib cage. You can see that here. And that's how it's shaped in that dome shape. So all the way connected here and to the ribs. Now, the central tendon, that's the big flat tendon here at the top of the diaphragm. This is connected to the bag of fascia that we have around the lungs. So the lungs, you've seen the, it's like these tree branches, branches off, and at the end, we have the little alveoli. And then around that, we have the tissue of the lungs, and then you have a bag around it. And I see that you actually don't see the indicator of my mouse, unfortunately, but I hope that you can see it. Hey, you see the white flat part on the top of the diaphragm, on top of this dome shape. So that white part at the top is the tendon. And there, that is sort of connecting to the bag that is around the lungs. And as you can imagine, the lungs are just lying on top of that tendon inside the ribs. And then the organs are lying below that, what I just showed you on myself as I was standing up. So the diaphragm, as we inhale, it contracts and it becomes flat. And as it comes flat, the top of the diaphragm pulls down. And you can imagine, because the bag around the lungs is connected, then of course it also pulls that bag down. So it pulls the lungs down, and then, the rib cage expands because of also the other muscles that are working. That rib cage becomes bigger, and that's when air gets sucked in. And on the video that I sent you the link, I just sent it in the WhatsApp group. You can watch it later, and then you'll actually see it in an animation. And I always, as I said, I find it very clear to see it like that. Then we have the intercostal muscles. They are lying in between our ribs, and we have 3 layers. And it's the outermost layer, the external intercostal muscles, that actually help as they contract to widen, to broaden the rib cage. So it's the external intercostal muscle that helps us with inhaling. And then you have the two layers, the middle layer and the innermost, like the deepest layer. Those two layers, they actually, when they contract, they pull the rib cage again together, make it smaller. So that means that because they make the rib cage smaller, it sort of presses onto the lungs, and then the air gets sucked out, or pressed out, I have to say. Yeah, so those muscles, there are three layers in between the ribs, and the outer layer helps with inhaling, and the two inner layers, they help with exhaling. And then looking at the neck. So as you can see, we have these muscles. On the left side, you see the sternocleidomastoid. And on the right side, you see the scalenes. And they are in the neck, and they are connected to those lowest ribs. Now, when we don't use them to move the head, if you keep your head upright and you're breathing in deeply, you can imagine as you're contracting those muscles in your neck, they become shorter, that they're actually going to pull your rib cage up slightly. So meaning that they pull it up, meaning that they help with extension or expansion, I have to say, of the rib cage. Because lifting it up also is more space for the lungs to breathe. Then we have the pectoralis muscles, and then it's mainly the pectoralis minor. You see it on the right side. It lays just on the inside, so deeper than the pectoralis major. And also you can see the muscles are with the fibers running straight down, meaning that if they contract, they shorten like this. So this becomes shorter, meaning that it will also pull up the chest and the rib cage. So as it pulls up, it will make the rib cage, the chest, broader, bigger, and air gets sucked into the lungs. And so any muscle, almost any muscle that is connected to the ribs, in general, you can say they have something to do with either inhale or exhale. And most of the time, when it's this, of course, when it's this expansion, when it's making the rib cage bigger, it's the inhale. Now, the pectoralis major actually also helps a little bit with the breath, but it's mostly when you are in a certain position, and maybe it makes sense that when you think of it, think of runners that just run a marathon, or they were sprinting. Then in general, when they finish, they put their hands, and I hope that you can sort of see this, they put their hands on their thighs, and they're standing like this, and then they start to, like, they're breathing. They're like this. And actually, when you are in this position, and then you would contract those pectoralis muscles, you help the chest to become bigger. So when a sprinter or a marathon runner finishes and they feel like, oh my God, I'm out of breath, I need to breathe more, then it's an automatic response of the body. They put their hands on their thighs, and then they start to really breathe, panting sometimes, and then it's really that pectoralis muscle that helps. But only when we rest the hands onto the thighs, and then that muscle can really help to create that space in the rib cage as well. So that's actually interesting, I thought, because in general you don't see it so many times in books that the pectoralis major is also a helper here, but it is a helper for the breath. And then for the exhale, as I said before, any muscle that would help to bring the ribs back together again, any muscle that would compress the belly or the lower part of the torso, that helps with exhalation. So during the inhale, the muscles we spoke about before, they make the rib cage bigger, air gets sucked in. And then on the exhale, remember the muscles in between the ribs, those two innermost layers, when they contract, pull the rib cage closer or smaller, air gets sucked out. And then we have the transverse abdominis, and we have the transverse abdominis, and we have the QL, which lies in the back, to help us also with stabilizing and pressing air out. Oh, I hope that it's going to load. Yes, it does. Let me get back to, where are we? Yes, here we are. So this is just showing you, again, the muscles in between the ribs. And then we go to the muscles that we have in, like our abdominal muscles and the core. And then you will see the third name from above, the transversus abdominis. You can see it's the most deepest layer. And the fibers are running like a corset. So the fibers are running horizontal, meaning that when the fibers contract, it pulls in, and it's like a corset really being pulled tight. It will really pull in here, and it really sort of shrinks again this lower part in, so that as this presses in, of course, the organs again gets pressed up, the diaphragm gets pressed up, and then the air gets sucked out. And then we have the quadratus lumborum. That is the muscle that lies on the back, and it's like our back wall. And that is more like a stabilizer, but also it sort of contracts to the moment we start to what we want to exhale. It's making sure that, like as you're also contracting that transverse abdominis, that, for example, the organs don't sort of press into our back wall and that they go there. No, it's contracting to keep us stable, and then the organs get pressed up towards the diaphragm. Here you have another picture of the quadratus lumborum. That's why we call it our back wall. It's quite a big muscle, the lower back. So this is just showing you, again, just from the side, the respiratory system, and you can see quite how high up. And when you look on the right picture, you see how high up the diaphragm actually ends up. And it doesn't mean that that's like that for everyone. It can also, as again, everybody is different. So this is just an average, a model, but it is quite high up. And you can also imagine, maybe it's something that you maybe heard before, or maybe experienced even, that we can also hold a lot of tension, of course, in our body. We can hold a lot of tension like within our breath system and the muscles what we breathe with, so that it actually becomes quite hard to breathe. And when there is a lot of tension, our breath can be fairly shallow. Think about also like stress or anxiety moments. So we can have tension in the breath as we breathe. We can find like restriction basically in the breath. And it can also have to do really with literally a lot of tension and muscles of our breathing system. And for example, the diaphragm being tight. And we will speak a little bit more about that also later, in one of the sessions. Let me see if there are any other pictures here for you to see. Yes, this is also in your book. Again, this is just showing you how within the lungs those branches look. It's actually so much related to a tree when you think about it. So it's also beautiful when you think of those two systems. We need plants and trees to breathe, and they actually need us for the CO2 because they use that as their fuel. But it's so much connected, like it looks so much like a tree, and like, yeah, our lungs are very similar to that. And then here you see, of course, on the left side, you see a picture of the capillaries with around the alveoli. So those little balloon shaped, where the extension, the little balls, the balloon shaped, like, or grapes, you can also call it. And you see that the capillaries are around that, and there the exchange of the gases take place. And then here, this is actually a picture of those branches that we have inside the lungs. Now, this is more, you can see this more as when you would fill the lungs with like a waxy kind of liquid, and you would just fill up all the branches and the smaller branches, and then also the alveoli. And if you would have that dry up and then take away all the other tissue that is around it, you have this. And for me, I find this is so beautiful because it reminds me also so much of corals in the ocean. But here you can actually see how the lungs really look. And then you see on the left side where you have the black background, and you can just see the picture that we saw before, that coral-like shape, the branches of the lungs, basically, in the alveoli that is within the tissues that are around there. Because actually, when you look at the lung, it is from the outside, it is more, as you can see on the right side in that picture. And you can also see that we have separate lobes. So the lungs consist of separate lobes. They're not just one. And also in the video that you see, it shows it so that you have a bit more of a knowledge about that. And think of the right lung is always a bit bigger than the left lung, because the left lung also, it needs to make space partly for the heart. And you can also see that a bit in this picture. So tension versus compression. Now, this is talking about variable anatomy and that we are all different, and how, like, what stops us as we are doing a certain yoga pose, and where do we feel it, what is going on in the body, and from there you can start to feel whether it is something that you can still work on, or is it something that you can't work on anymore because there is basically compression and bone is hitting bone in the body. So asana practice, and what stops us to go further in a pose is, there's two things that can happen. It's either tension, so tensile resistance in the body, or it's compression. Compression meaning that it's either flesh hitting flesh, or flesh hitting bone, or bone hitting bone. And to explain this a bit more, so when we practice yoga, when we practice asanas, we move our joints. When we move our joints, bones are pivoting away from each other. You can think of my arm for a moment. I'm moving from the joint, I'm extending the arm, and I'm pivoting bones away from each other. So the tissues that lie here, they get a stretch or a stress, and the stress results in a stretch. Now, the first thing that limits our motion, the range of motion, is how far can we stretch this? So are the tissues tight? Is the skin tight? And what can stop us? The first thing would be a stretch, a tensile resistance. The last thing that stops a motion would be compression. In this case, for example, bone hitting bone of the upper arm bone, the humerus hitting the ulna bone, because yeah, the bones just can't hook anymore into each other, and that's stopping me from having my arm go down into this direction. Yeah. So compression happens due to the shape of our bones, due to the shape of our body. And basically, sometimes we can work around it a little bit, but in general, you can say this is where your movement is going to stop. And it doesn't matter if you're going to do 2 more years of yoga or 5 more years of yoga or 10 more years of yoga, it's not going to stop it. Yeah? So basically, when we reach our edge in a certain pose, there's 2 things: either tissues, they can't stretch any longer, and that's tension, and we can still work on that because we can work on tensile resistance, or it is compression, and it's literally the body hitting itself somewhere. So maybe you want to just put in the chat for me, huh? What is it that can be tense? What tensile resistance can stop us? What do you think about? Sharon is saying muscles, ligaments, and tendons. Yeah, for sure. Any other things that you can think of? Nadira says the joint. Yeah, but then the joint, yeah, it could be the bones, yeah, but the bones, that is not so much then the tensile resistance. Haha, Nienke says fat. I would say fat is probably more a compression issue and not so much a stretching issue, I think, because I think fat cells can stretch quite a bit. Let's see if anybody else has any other ideas. Lack of range, yeah, but what is the lack of range? Yeah, a few more things coming in, short muscles. Yeah, but we said already muscles. Yeah, I'll just stop the chat now and I'll go through my list because I am missing a few things on your end. And that is the skin, for example. And even our skin can be tight. Then you could think of scar tissue. If I had an accident and I have a big scar here, scar tissue is like fascia that, just think about what I said about bones as well. When we heal ourselves, it's really intense, dense tissue. Same with scar tissue, it can really restrict the range of motion after. Because it sort of is fascia that's all like cluttered together and interwoven and intertwined. So the nice spider web that you can see, maybe it's all like tangled up. Fascia, and we have fascia all over the body. Fascia can make us tight. Fascia is of course also 30% of a muscle. And then a muscle can be tight. The muscle fibers itself can be tight. And we also have muscle tonus. That's more part of the nervous system. Can somebody actually relax as they come into a pose? And many people, they lie down and then they think, now my body is relaxed. But then when you really start to look and feel, you see that maybe they're still flexing their feet. Maybe the feet are still up as they're lying and they don't let their feet relax and fall out to the side. Maybe the face is still engaged, and there is literally an illness, so to say, where the nervous system cannot let go of muscle tonus. And when there is, because we always have a certain muscle tonus, I'm not specifically engaging here to keep myself upright, but there is some muscle tonus to keep me stable. And I have to, of course, engage in some muscles to keep me here, because otherwise I would collapse down. But if I would be standing, and if there's no muscle tonus, if the nervous system doesn't tell the muscles to have a certain kind of engagement, then I wouldn't be able to stand up. I would fall like a little flan or a pudding, I would collapse. Yes, so muscle tonus, if there is an illness with the muscle tonus and there can't be any relaxation, then that could also avoid someone from stretching any further into a pose. Now, and then of course, ligaments and tendons and joint capsules can be tight as well. I see the chat coming in. Let me just check. Yes, Claudia, you're going way too fast. Of course, I will get there. So how do we find out what tension resistant is? Yes, well, we're going to get there. So the spectrum of what is stopping me, we now know what can be tensile resistance. So it can be all different tissues and different parts of the body. But what is stopping me is going through this spectrum. The first sort of range of motion, or sorry, this first stop in a range of motion, if you've never done yoga and you're 50 and you're doing it for the first time, you can imagine how tight your tissues would be. And then you would start all the way to the left of this spectrum. And as you're opening up the body, you're going more and more towards the right. Now, this is more going from one stage to the next, the colors, the really bright colors. And then when we talk about compression, flesh on flesh or bone on flesh or bone on bone, that just depends on where in the body it's happening. So this is not first coming here, second here, and then there. Yeah, this is just compression altogether. And it can be either this or that or that. But from here, you could say first, the tensile resistance is first surface tension. So the skin and the more superficial layers of fascia. Going a bit deeper, more myofascial meridians, or and there are specific lines in the body that can be tight, but it's also just that the fascia that are inside the muscles as well. And then we have muscles and tendons that can be tight. And then you're getting to a point where ligaments and joint capsules will be tight. Now, this is right in the middle, ligaments and joint capsules. If you look at my mouse indicator, this is right in the middle of tensile resistance and compression. You could say that this purple block also connects a little bit to compression, because remember what I said before, our aim in yin yoga is not to overstretch or to stretch and lengthen the ligaments and joint capsules, because we also want to keep a certain stability in the body. Yes, so when we are talking about surface tension, myofascial meridians, muscles and tendons, if they are tight, there you can stretch them with yoga, yin yoga or dynamic yoga, yang yoga. When we're working on ligaments and joint capsules, of course, we work on them with yin and we create a bit more space, but it's not the idea to, over a length of time, literally make them so much longer that at some point the humerus bone pops out of the shoulder, for example. So I hope that that makes sense. And with yoga specifically, we work on those first three to lengthen, and that lengthening will stay, so to say. You're opening into the body and that openness in the body will stay. With yin yoga, we work also more on these ligaments and joint capsules. We open them, but they also sort of come back together, and we're not really, the aim is not to create complete openness and length. And then we have the compression, flesh on flesh, bone on flesh, or hard would be bone on bone. So soft is flesh on flesh, and you can think about that as if I'm doing a forward fold and my belly hits my thighs. My belly is soft, it's flesh, it's meat. The upper thighs are soft, it's flesh, it's meat, and they meet each other. And yeah, it's just my body, I can't press through it. There is maybe a way to work around it, but you see it in a moment. But for now, you would say it's flesh on flesh, it's soft. If you have a big belly because you're pregnant and you're coming forward, the belly will reach the thighs And only by opening the legs, you can come a little bit deeper and work around it. When we have a medium compression, bone on flesh, you can think more of things like in the hip or where the glute is. And remember how we saw also with the hip socket and then the shaft and the angle of the shaft of the femur bone, like how quickly for some people compression takes place. And in general, that compression, because there's a lot of meat around here, in general, that compression is not just bone hitting bone straight away, but there will probably be some meat somewhere in between. Like in this movement, if the socket would be hitting the rim of the bone, and probably there will be some tissue in between that. I hope that makes sense. And then when we're talking about bone on bone, this is what I showed you before. We have the humerus bone. It has a hook that sticks out, and the ulna has a little bit of a bowl, so to say, and the hook and the bowl, they hit each other. And that is really hard bone on bone feeling. And you sort of feel that is literally like more like a dull sensation. That's more bone on bone. So those are the different forms of compression. Now, answering a little bit more Claudia's question. So how do we know? How do we know whether it's compression or it's tension? Well, it is fairly simple, although it's simple for people that really have learned to connect to their body and to really feel their body. Maybe more difficult for people that don't have so much body awareness, but hopefully through yoga, they get the body awareness, they get to connect to their body, and more they start to know what's happening. Yeah, so tension is shown to you in picture A, and compression is shown to you in picture B. So this lady is coming into a forward fold, caterpillar. And caterpillar is what we say a range of motion where this part of the body is what we call towards the movement. The back of the body, what we say is that is away from the movement. Yeah, so anything we're feeling here is towards the movement, and anything that we're feeling away from the movement, that would be on this side. So if we feel something away from the movement and at the back of her body, if she's feeling it all behind the legs and maybe the lower back, maybe even along the whole spine, that is tensile resistance, tension. As she is feeling it towards the movement, in the direction of the movement, which is here, it's the chest hitting the thighs. This is soft compression. Now, if she would be feeling it here, in this movement, she doesn't feel any sensation on the back of the legs or at the back here along the spine, but she is feeling something here that is into the direction of the movement, meaning that she will have compression here. Who knows, maybe her ilium bone is hitting on the flesh of that upper thigh, and literally for her, it's not possible to fold any further. Maybe if she would spread her legs wide, then she can come forward because that compression, that sensation that she feels here is gone. It's not hitting anymore. Same for this variation, this lady here in B. And now she's hitting her chest on the legs. If she would spread her legs wide, then maybe the chest can come even lower to the floor. But at some point, her chest will hit the floor, and then you have compression again. Then what can we do? We can dig a hole in the floor, and then maybe she can sink lower even more with the chest. But at some time, there will be compression that ends the movement. I see a chat coming in. Let me just check. How does it apply to a back bend like swings or seal? Okay, we're going to talk about that later. So remind me if I forget to answer you, but I just want to continue a little bit longer with this, just to show you a little bit more in depth. So in general, we can say that when beginners come to yoga, the first thing that they would feel is tensile restriction. Tension will restrict their range of motion. And in time, as they're working with the movements, the tissues away, or the areas away from the movement, they start to open so that they can make it possible for a range of motion to actually happen. And then from there, at some point, what happens next is that literally bone on bone or flesh on bone compression happens. Yeah. So at some point, however, if a student is doing yoga, and it's all creating openness in the body, there will be a reach of compression at some point for everyone. It can even be because the floor is in the way. It can be because a body, soft flesh is hitting soft flesh, or a bone on bone. Yes, an exception may arise when the tension occurs in a joint capsule. So basically, capsular ligaments, they provide also this sort of tension that may limit the range of motion. And this is something that doesn't disappear over time, of course. And this may be your ultimate limit. So then it's not so much compression, flesh hitting flesh, or bone hitting flesh, or bone hitting bone, but it is more literally the joint capsule or the ligaments around it that basically restrict you from going any further. Again, this is something that you don't want to push through. It's fine to create some more opening, and maybe you, after doing a lot of yin yoga, you will get a bit further. But on the other hand, we also don't want to create instability. So that is important, that our intention of a yoga practice, and especially also with yin, it's not that we want to become hypermobile in the joints. So we still want to keep strength in the joint capsule, in the ligaments. And we basically accept those limitations. And that is maybe a little bit harder to feel, like when is it a joint capsule, or when is it like literally compression. But as long as you sort of get to feel the difference between tension and compression, then for me it's okay, and not to feel specifically the ligaments. I don't think that I also always exactly know how to pinpoint it. I'm just going to go back a few because I just want to show you something here. So what I find important, a few more tips on like how can you feel this and how can you recognize it. First of all, when you have sensations, specific sensations in the body, in general, when you have sensations in muscles, if it's a sensation of a stretch, of tensile resistance in a muscle, it is general something that is felt more over a larger, a bigger area. So it's not so much pinpointing into just one little spot. It's more around a bigger area. And also that sensation is in general more like a burning sensation. When you're feeling more compression, so say that she is feeling a restriction here, and she can't fold any further, or like this lady here, the compression is in a smaller place. And especially when, like with this, she's very flexible, so she will feel her whole torso on the thighs, maybe a bit bigger than when you're just feeling a little bit or a little area here. But in general, you can say tensile resistance is more spread out, And compression is more in one place, like a smaller area. When we feel like bone on bone, compression kind of feeling in the pain or the sensation that we feel in bones are in general more dull sensation. Then when you feel something in like tendons and ligaments, like really like an overstretching, it is more a sharp pain, like a stabbing pain. And then when you have sensations with, for example, nerves is more tingling sensation. Yeah, so muscles more burning sensation and more spread out, especially like the tension. Nerves is more tingling sensation. Compression is more smaller sensation, like a smaller area. And also you feel like when you feel more bones, it's more dull sensation. When there is too much sensation for like tendons and ligaments, it's more sharp. And of course, these are my words and I have a feeling with that, and everybody interprets words in a different way. So to describe this to your students, it's always, yeah, you have to sort of you have to ask them questions. What do you feel? Where do you feel it? Is it spread out? Is it like really more narrowed down? Giving you an example with, for example, the arm again. Let me just make this a bit bigger. So if I want to extend my arm and my range of motion is here, and I have a huge scar here, and I'm feeling, oh, sorry, I have I can have a scar here actually. Yeah, that could be a stretch, but also like because I want to extend the arm, I should have a lot of range of motion here. I should have a lot of tissues here that can stretch in order for me to extend the arm. I'm pivoting away also here. So with the arm, if I have tension here, say that I had a big accident and there's a scar, and that makes me feel like I feel it here and I feel it quite spread out. Then doing yoga practice and maybe a nice massage, trying to get the cells of the scar to break up again. And then little by little, hey, I can start to straighten my arm again. So I'm working through tensile resistance. But the movement, this movement, extension is head towards this direction. So if I would be feeling it anywhere here, then that would be compression. So if I feel a little bit dull sensation in the elbow, I know that bone is hitting bone. But if I am here and I'm still feeling a lot away from the movement here, then maybe I can still work through that. Maybe it's still scar tissue or the tissues are tight here. And then maybe because of the shape of my bones, my arm, that could actually be here. So I hope that that makes sense. And same with the shoulder. Extension of the shoulder. Bringing the shoulder up. Or bringing the arm up. Now, if I'm feeling it somewhere here, I remember the compression that we said also of the chromium process. At some point, that humerus is going to hit there, and I'm feeling it towards into the direction of the movement. So here, that is compression. If I'm feeling a lot here, I can't lift the arm because I'm feeling a lot here, then this might be super tight and it's restricting me from actually bringing the arm higher. And then to reply to Ree's question, how does that work then, for example, with a back bend? Well, if you're back bending and you're feeling dull sensations along the spine and specifically in the lower back, remember also when we looked at those two specific lumbars and you saw some had the vertebrae, the spinous process is much more closer together. If they hit each other, that would be compression. So if I'm back bending and I can't go any further and I feel a lot of compression in the lower back, well, that is compression. You already say it. You feel that compression because you just feel sort of, you can't go further and you're not feeling anything here. If you are feeling a lot of stretch here, and that's avoiding you from going more backwards because maybe your hip flexors are tight, maybe your quadriceps are tight, maybe your belly and the chest muscles are tight, and they are avoiding you from doing a back bend. Yeah, and with some of the areas in the body, it's harder to feel it than with other areas in the body. Some areas are a little bit more clear, like when is it compression and when is it a tensile resistance. And for other places in the body, it is a bit harder. But again, by asking questions to your students, what kind of sensation is it? Where do you feel it? Hopefully you come a little bit closer to the question or to the answer of the question. Is it compression? Is it tension? And can we work around it? So these two concepts of tension and compression, they will come up every time we sort of investigate our body, and it sort of dictates like what movement is available to us. How far can we go? And once we've stretched out all the tissues as far as we can, then of course we reach a moment of compression. And then it's also okay to say, this is where I stop. Because pressing through that all the time, trying because you feel like, I should be able to do this just like my neighbor does the pose, then you're just going to press through compression. And at some point that can be dangerous and it can be injurious. You might just hurt your body. So, and that's what I love about this, this realizing of variable anatomy, realizing that we are all different, knowing that there is not just one perfect pose, and also knowing that, that we are all different and that all our shapes look different for everybody in Trikonasana. It can look a bit different. It doesn't mean that that you're not doing Trikonasana in the right way. Yeah? Now I'm talking about a yang pose, but the same for any yin posture, of course. And especially with yin, we are looking to get sensation. So finding that sensation, and when you have that, when you feel that sensation, it doesn't matter how deep you are in the pose, you're doing it. And step away from looking at all those Instagram yogis that are constantly showing you like the most difficult pose, and you feel like a loser if you can't get there. Because just remember, everybody is different, and it's also stepping away a little bit from what is the proper alignment. Always listen to your body and forget about that there's just one perfect pose.